Well, it's Thursday, September 22nd, 2022. Good morning, I'm Andy Johnson. Welcome to the program. This is how we're going to begin AM Prime for this morning. Let's tell you what's happening. In the second hour, we'll be talking with Mr. Ravi Balgobin Maharaj, a public citizen who's gone to court on various issues having to do with the governance in the country, with decision making, and with how we apply the law to things and to institutions in the country. We've asked him to comment on this matter that is in the public domain now, the charges laid against a member of parliament for point of peer. Mr. Lee is saying that he's innocent and he will successfully defend himself in court. The question is, what then is the basis for the charges laid against him, charges that were advised upon by the country's director of public prosecutions? We're taking away from that the allegations from one side, from the opposition side, that these charges were politically motivated, that somehow the police officers who were investigating the matter and proffered the charges have been influenced by the political directorate, the people in power in the country. We will try and dissect those points when we get to Mr. Balgobin Maharaj on the other side of this hour. We're also talking in this hour, though, with Ms. Cavell Joseph Saint-Omer. She's the president of the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and one of her colleagues, Mr. Andrea Davis, who is the country manager for DHL. That's one of the organizations that bring stuff into the country and take stuff out as we like them to be. The question is the C-suite conversations, and the topic that they're producing with this, in this instance, is something called the future of work. So we'll hear from these two ladies on what they see as the necessity for that and how that is going to happen. Of course, work is changing and has been changing all around us, particularly with the advent of COVID-19. But in a moment from now, we'll be talking with Ms. Anita Haynes. She's a member of the opposition in the parliament, and she's the shadow minister for education on that side. And we're talking about the calls for rest and reflection by members of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, the situation with education, some main points about what is education or what it should be and what it is not, with Ms. Haynes on the other side of this break. We're coming back in a moment. Stay with us. Stay where you are.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The best birthday gifts are at dbesttoys.com. Shop for the best brands you love at the best prices, like VTech, Leapfrog, Fisher-Price, Play-Doh, Hot Wheels, Barbie, Cocomelon, LOL, Baby Alive, Crayola. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship MacBean. Shop online now at dbesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 32DBEST to order. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Welcome back to the program. Well, Ms. Anita Haynes is a member of parliament on the opposition side. She's the future of politics and leadership in the country. From that perspective, we can say that. She's the shadow minister of education on the opposition side. We're talking with her this morning about two particular matters, two touch points. One is tutors' call for rest and reflection in the face of the situation regarding industrial relations, where we are with workers working for state organizations, and the CPO, where the position is how we get movement on that, as well as the Ministry of Education's adjustment to the assessment format and the sort of looking at new moves to address education development in the country, the primary and secondary school students, the national test and the national certificate of secondary education examinations and stuff having to do with that. It sounds complicated, but it really is not. So let's get to the first discussion now about tutor, the situation with industrial relations in the country from that perspective. Anita, good morning. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
How are you?
Well, good, thanks. Good, thanks. All right, so will you have a latest perspective on this continued rest and reflection that teachers are embarking on? Good, bad, indifferent?
Well, absolutely. I mean, at the end of August, which was the press conference the Ministry of Education had before the opening of the new school term, the minister went through very great pains saying thank you to the teaching service. And I think the minister, Dr. Diana Gatsby-Dolly, reflected on what most of the nation was thinking, that teachers really had, I mean, next to healthcare workers, some of the most work during the pandemic to hold up an education sector in a hybrid mode, in an online mode, in getting things to students. I mean, most of us know a number of teachers who went in their own pockets over the pandemic to get material to students who couldn't get online, etc. And at the end of that press conference, the minister said that we owe them a very big thank you. The fact is, we don't really owe them a thank you. We do owe them, at the very least, proper negotiations. And I think in this latest fallout, Tutor is calling for CPO to, at the very least, adhere to the negotiation guidelines that have been set for quite some time. And this is something that we've been seeing across the board, in particular with the teaching service, because as you've recognized, I am in fact the shadow for education, so I pay very close attention. But this constant call for proper consultation, not in this ad hoc manner, but in this particular case, there is a format for negotiations, and that the tutor is saying, look, that has not been adhered to. There's not been good faith in these negotiations. And so while for all of us, and I believe teachers included, I'm sure teachers included, the students and the children remain heavy on our minds. The fact is that all of the persons involved within the teaching service, they also have families, and they are certainly entitled to, at the very least, good faith negotiations. So I think as they embark on the strategies that they believe will provoke good faith negotiations, we do have a duty as a citizenry, as the population of Trinidad and Tobago, to at least stand on the side for what is right, which is you should be allowed access to good faith negotiations.
All right, can you have a personal view on this, or you have to carry the party line as to whether there's support for this continued day of reflection business? And I'm asking the question in the context of the fact that the president of the industrial court a couple of days ago is calling all sides to get back to the spirit of tripartism.
Well, the party has a space and where we discuss these things. I mean, the UNC has been very clear on its stance with respect to wage negotiations and persons being able to earn a living during where we are today, in 2022 and with the rising cost of living. But I also do have a personal stance, which in this case certainly aligns with what the party is saying, which is that you really cannot have persons working for thanks. If you at the very least need to honor your part and have a space where they feel heard in the negotiation. The work is valued, the work that you've been doing, not for just the last 2 years, which really has put a strain on the system, but for the past, I think it is 9 years at this point. And so, yes, I am allowed a personal view, and I am carrying my personal view, but I'm also carrying the party's view, which is that persons really in this country, if you are doing the work, at the very least, you must be in a space where you can negotiate for your salary and negotiate for your sector. And not, I mean, we're coming out now from, if we just throw our minds back to early years of inbreed, we're coming out of the 000 negotiation stance. And so, I mean, and while we hear the calls for let's return to a space where there can be discussions, we must be very clear that the persons who shut down discussions in this country is the government and not the workers.
Well, why do you say that? When in fact, so the CPO put something on the table, they didn't agree to it. They marched and so on and made a position, and they went back on the table, and it was increased, and then they said no, we're not accepting that either. So how should the discussions go forward then?
With tutors specifically, and again, negotiations have a guideline, and that's why they're called negotiations. And that's why I want to be very clear. When you look at the space of the last 7 years, the 000, the wage freeze, as it were not in the spirit of negotiation. So now that you've CPO has put something on the table, it's been rejected. Yes, you've had the spaces, but now I think the call for the action today, on Thursday, is that CPO has not responded to their latest correspondence. So again, it seems as if they're going back to the space where they are shut out of negotiations, and they've lived through that for the past 7 years. And I think we can all understand where frustration will build from there. And so yes, while you encourage discussions, it can't only be one-sided. Discussions has to be, like I keep saying, in good faith.
So therefore, you think the CPO, the president of the Industrial Court, is speaking more directly to the CPO than to the unions?
Well, ought to be. Well, certainly ought to be.
All right. Let's come to the other issue now, the question of the review of the format of national assessments for what is called collection of data on student performances. How do you see what the Ministry of Education is doing? How do you assess, these new performance standards that have been highlighted here?
Well, from that announcement from the ministry, I think where they're coming from is heeding a call that I have been making for years at this point in time, which is let us improve our data collection. So they are rethinking how the national test is done and rethinking the space in which we collect data. So I see that they've set out some guidelines in terms of how this will be done. The students' results won't be sent to schools. There'll be a random sample, and they're doing a test in Standard 1, Standard 3, and Form 3, which would then, from my early assessment of just the information being put out by the ministry, I'm assuming it's done in order to catch where students' performance is at before the examination years in Standard 5, 4 and Form 5 respectively. And if the data collection is one thing, I'm very grateful to hear that there's even some sort of data collection, because I have been saying for years at this point that policy making without data collection is really a shot in the dark. But how we utilize the data collected, I think, remains to be seen. So we're in the early stages. Grateful to hear a space about that there's a conversation about data collection. Sad that it has taken 7 years, but and that has taken this particular year of very poor overall results. We're seeing students who, we're seeing a significant number of students not scoring 50% and over in the SEA, and then students not attaining full certificates, lower pass rates in math and English at the CSEC level. So clearly something is going wrong. The data collection ought to help, but only if the data informs policy making. If we collect the data and it's sitting somewhere in the ministry, then we really see no material impact on the education sector.
And how sanguine are you that, in fact, the data will lead to the information of policy, given our track record generally nationally on these things?
I try to be overall an optimistic person. At the end of the day, in this particular sector, we are talking about the future of our entire country, literally the next generation of Trinidadians and Tobagoans. The utilization of the data will be coming from the technocrats. I think where the onus is on us as a citizenry is to listen to what the government of the day is saying, and the prospective government of the alternative government, the opposition, and listen to what the policies are on education. I think the population will have a very good space to assess what the thinking is on the future of education over the upcoming budget debates and all of the information that's being put out there. I think you've seen over the last few years, we've gotten little to no information as to where the innovation in the education sector is coming from. And so I believe that now is the time for the entire country to start really paying attention to what those who currently are leading and those who intend to lead are saying about where we're at and where we can be, because certainly we need to start looking at how are we going to innovate our education sector beyond just the conversation of hardware devices, but how are we innovating the curriculum? Are our students prepared for a world of work in the future, or are we stuck in a time that's already gone?
What is your view on that?
I think right now we are certainly not educating our students to be innovators, entrepreneurs. We are trying to get them through a system of passes, which is unsuccessfully so. And unless we course correct very quickly, we're going to have a significant under and unemployment problem in Trinidad and Tobago, simply because of our students now aren't trained for the world of work that they will be going into.
And you have on the other side of that a lot of people who are highly qualified and can't find jobs that fit their areas of study and their areas of scholarship and so on. Absolutely,
and that's why when about 3 or 4 years ago, at the time I would have been in the Senate, we were discussing the population was discussing the changes to GATE. At that point in time, I said, listen, don't do a slash and burn on the education sector. Don't just simply cut the funding to GATE, but utilize the funding to GATE in a way that you understand your national development goals, understand jobs that we need as a country to go forward, and then strategically place your tertiary education funding so that you incentivize more persons to go into the spaces that we need. They have not done that. That just hasn't been done. And so you're not seeing an effective utilization of limited resources. You aren't seeing the thought process into how are we going from primary to secondary to tertiary education to a world of work, because education must count for something. You are building a society. We just, and I mean, over this past few weeks, especially with the exam results, I was extremely disheartened to hear both the Minister of Education and the Prime Minister suggest that all we need our students to do is attain the most basic level of passes for entry into the government service, when they are, on the other hand, to go back to our earlier discussion with the CPO and whatnot, complaining about the wage bill to the state. And so there is an absolute disconnect in government policy, because you are not incentivizing the education sector to take persons out of the government service and into entrepreneurship, the private sector, etc. And then on the other hand, you are then not willing to negotiate with them to have a living wage as the cost of living goes up. And so we are really in a space where Trinidad and Tobago is seeing what happens when you have disconnected policy making by an executive.
Yeah, and at the bottom of this, as an overall kind of position, the question still remains about this, the debate inside there as to what extent the education system that we have is just too elitist, or tending towards creating elitism rather than an equality among people who go through the system?
Yeah, equitable access to education has been a major pillar of where I've grounded my political career, and certainly one of the reasons why I chose to join the UNC, because you understood that wider space of policy making to ensure that there's equitable access to education, which then means more equitable access to opportunities. To answer your question, I think the pandemic has really also set us back in terms of our education sector catering to fewer persons, because you saw persons who literally at this point in time could not afford to go to school getting left out of the system and dropping out altogether. The new system for data collection, for example, with the national test, as we just spoke about, will not capture those students who are no longer in the system. Sadly, Trinidad and Tobago is in a space right now where parents have to decide, parents are deciding whether or not they can afford to send all of their children to school. So while you're looking at the system and access to certain types of education, we've actually gone so far back that we have to ask ourselves whether or not persons are even able to afford access to education. I mean, while it's free on paper, it's not free in reality. You're talking school transportation, uniform, books, etc. And you're finding that persons, the most vulnerable in our society, are unable to access the very thing that may increase your economic power in this country.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Anita Haynes, the putative next education minister in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you so much, Andy, and have a great day, and a great day to your viewers.
Thank you very much. We will take a break. When we come back, we begin with the Newsday poll, the question and responses. As we go forward, we'll be talking about this concept of the C-suite conversations promoted by the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago. We'll get to that on the other side. Stay with us.
The Guide family has been serving TNT for over 80 years. JE Guide Funeral Home and Crematorium, 2 locations, San Fernando and Princestown.
Chantwell Vibes, a musical tribute to Andre Tanker, Saturday, September 24th, 2022, Central Bank Auditorium. Showtime, 7:30 p.m. Featuring 3 Canal, Mavis John, Ataclan, Empress Ajay, Stacy Sobers, and panist Natasha Joseph. Tickets $300. Available at Crosby's Music Center, St. James. Extra Foods, Arima, Grand Bazaar, and Endeavour. Online at Island E-Tickets. Committee members at 678-2843 or 482-3111. Central Bank box office on the day of the event. Mart's Liquor Palace, Diego Marte Main Road, La Puerta. A musical tribute to Andre Tanker. Saturday, September 24th, 2022. Central Bank Auditorium. Showtime, 7:30 p.m.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers? Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best. I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
Only on WESN,
the Content Capital.
Welcome back to the program. We take a look at what the question is and what the responses are. This morning's Newsday poll, and the question is, with the WHO saying the pandemic may be ending soon, but new cases and deaths still taking precautions when out in the public, that's the question. Should people still be doing that? If you think so, you say why. If not, you say why not. So here are some of the responses. Somebody asking, ending soon, most people with sense stopped giving this attention since last year. Another response is that, of course, I will still wear my mask. Which part that pandemic ending soon? Another response, yes, prevention is better than cure. And the final response, I'm not seeing it showing up here. But so there were 4 responses to this question, with the WHO saying that the pandemic may be ending soon, but new cases and deaths are still taking place. What precautions do you want to continue taking when out in the public? So those are the responses that you heard. Well, come to this discussion now. Cavell Joseph St. Omer is the president of the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and Andrea Davis is the country manager for DHL. And they are absolute principal in the second round of these discussions that they're calling the C-suite conversations. And the topic this time is the future of work. Cavell, good morning. Ms. Davis, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Andy.
All right, so the show is yours. Let's open with you, Cavell, and talk about this second round of these discussions, the C-suite conversations.
Well, just one correction, Andy. The theme is going global. The second round is focused on going global.
Going global, all right.
Yes.
And what
so
about
Hermat is hosting a series of in-depth discussions with C-level leaders on how their companies address business challenges and determine strategies for an ever-changing world. So in this edition, the focus is on going global. Our C-suite conversation started back in July 2022. And yes, we did look at the future of work at the Breakfast Forum. And now we're bringing, again, top executives to our signature event, really kind of hosting industry conversations, bringing people together once a quarter to give strategic insights on what organizations need to grow, and also the kind of support HR must give to executives. This event is scheduled for Wednesday, the 12th of October at the Hyatt from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m.
All right, and I'm trying to see that there's a connection between what work will look like, the future of work, and going global. So that's a kind of imperative. We have to go global in order to survive.
Mm-hmm. Well, it would appear so. Even before the pandemic, Andy, in terms of the strategies organizations took to expand business, and we are in a global world, and global HR management is absolutely necessary, not only for multinational companies in terms of they getting the right people in the right jobs in the right places, but also recognizing that even within Trinidad and Tobago, that there's competition, there's international businesses operating right here. So it's important for HR practitioners to have a global mindset and also to lead in cutting-edge HR strategies, because we are in a global world and we are competing whether or not our companies enter new territories or whether we stay domestic. Because Andrea, who is with us, she could share a bit about globalization in reverse, because DHL is in Trinidad and Tobago, for example.
Right.
So it's in that vein that we're having this conversation.
Right. I wanted to bring her on, but I wanted to ask you to make the case as to why she is part of this discussion this morning.
Yes. So it's important for everyone to understand, business leaders as well as practitioners alike, to understand the integrated network that depends, that HR executives are required to support our CEOs. It requires us to understand and to manage the function in such a way that we ensure that internal qualified candidates are readily available to support the strategy of companies. And there are companies that are achieving this through different strategies. We have multinationals, as I said, that operate right here. And Andrea represents a company like that. And we do have to recognize that additionally, our companies, our manufacturing, our services sector, they're looking outwards, expanding in terms of expanding their markets and expanding their business opportunities into new markets. So we recognize that in order to ensure profitability for our organizations, employability for our staff and our people, we must prepare our practitioners for a global world, the global world that we're living in. So it's in that vein we have Andrea with us as one of the key executives amongst 6 others who will be on the panel that day.
All right, so that's a good introduction, Ms. Davis. Let me ask you, so you are an HR professional who has gotten to the point of the ultimate suite in the organization that you now associated with, is that it? That's right?
Well, Andy, thank you. Cobell, thanks a lot for this. Andy, no, I have not been an HR professional. I have been in, different management roles across different functions, such as sales, marketing, customer service, etc. But once you're in a management type role, you ultimately have responsibility for HR as well. Yeah, you have
to do some HR,
right?
Yes.
Correct, because you have to take care of the people, even the HR manager. To Cobell's point, DHL is a fully global company. There's no question about it. We are in every single country and territory across the world, barring 1 or 2, given the current situation, the wars, etc. So that would be the Afghanistan, Russia. However, what I would say when it comes to people, when it comes to HR, there's a couple of things that we need to focus on. And the pandemic would have highlighted that even more. And that is the alignment of people and technology, right? The preparation of employees, the building of human capital for what I would call the next level. And that next level has already started. That next level is level of robotics. We talk about artificial intelligence, where you get a disconnect. And we all would have heard those conversations about, the robots are coming to take our jobs and all these different things. How do we create that alignment? How do we foster the confidence in our employees that, listen, we need the technology to come, because technology does a number of things. Apart from increasing and improving productivity, we have different efficiencies. It allows your business to grow, to scale. How do we close that gap and get employees to understand that? And being a global company, one of the things that DHL has always driven is that global human capital focus. So, for example, every single employee in DHL, once you start, you go through a program which is called CIS, and that is our Certified International Specialist. DHL has what I usually term its own university, right? And with that, every single employee that I have in Trinidad would have traveled to, whether it be the US, wherever they're hosting it. Most times it's our major hubs, which is all in Cincinnati or sometimes Miami. And they would spend a week up there learning and understanding the business on a deeper level and from a global perspective. So what happens is that when these employees return, yes, there is a local focus, but their mind is expanded. So they think from a global perspective. Apart from that, why this is also important for us is because there isn't a limit as to what an employee can do. And I'll share with you, since I've been with DHL, I've had a number of employees that would have moved from here and move their entire families and move to the US. So we have employees that move around globally in different parts of the business or different markets, whether it be to Switzerland, Australia, and it's not limited to any employee at any level. You can build and grow yourself. And that really comes from focusing on your human capital. That comes from building a global human capital workforce, more or less. I think that's one of the things you also have to consider is who is responsible for developing the employee?
Well, one would say that the employee, first and foremost, must be responsible for their own self-development, and then that the arrangements and the culture of the organization will assist that. Let me just bring back in Cavell on that point. And who is responsible for the development of the employee? To what extent the employee has to take a greater portion of that responsibility and be supported by the company's culture and the systems and so on?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Andy. And I always say it starts with the individual. You have a personal commitment to your own self-development. And that means preparing for the role or the job that you're applying for. So I always say to employees when they ask for advice on how to progress their careers, how to advance within the workspace, that it starts with you first. If there's a role that you see you want to fulfill, or maybe you see yourself as a general manager, as a CEO, or as a manager one day, look at what is required. Look at the job description for that position and look at the requirements, the basic requirements for it, and prepare yourself accordingly. So there's a personal responsibility. Then, of course, organizations have a responsibility to develop their staff as well, especially given just what Andrea said in terms of recruiting and hiring people and having a corporate university, preparing them for transition into that organization, orienting them into the business, understanding the operations, the culture, the mandate of the company in terms of why we're here, why we exist, what our corporate values are, what is our mission and vision, what are the key strategic objectives, and how we intend to work together as a people in this company that we're all supposed to be aligned and committed to. So there's a responsibility from the corporate side to ensure that we're all on the same page, all working towards the same vision for that organization. And we have a commitment as a company, and HR leads in this regard in setting the learning and development agenda for the organization to develop and prepare people for succession, for roles that may become vacant in the future, or prepare them for new roles, especially if we're entering new markets. It is called going global. So it means even preparing people for entry into global markets. Andrea shared a bit about opportunities provided to locals to work in Australia and Switzerland. But before they leave Trinidad and Tobago, they have to understand how business is conducted in these new territories. That will be a requirement of the organization to prepare the employee for market entry, cultural differences, understanding how business is conducted, the legal environment, the financial environment. So there's differences. Companies approach international expansion, and they may take an ethnocentric approach where the core values of the home or the home office, the base of the organization remains the same, but then you have to consider now the culture and the laws in the new territory as well. So you have to flex your strategy to incorporate that, and that way you gain success in the new market as well. So in that regard, there's an obligation to train, develop your employees, and it can happen within the organization, like having a corporate university as DHL, or it may mean outsourcing the whole element of training and having employees now, or supporting employees by facilitating learning and development opportunities external to the organization. But there's an obligation, especially if you intend to grow your business, because it takes people for your business to grow. It takes people to implement your strategy. And Andrea was right. Once you're leading, you are a people manager. So once you're in the business of leading and bringing resources together, and the HR is a resource, people are an asset, right? You have a responsibility to develop that asset the same way with any other, like a piece of equipment you maintain. You would also change out equipment from time to time. It's the same thing with people. You have a responsibility to maintain, develop, and ensure that there's leading and growth opportunities for your people.
All right, I want to come back to Ms. Davis about using the DHL sort of model in Trinidad and Tobago. How easy or difficult it is to sort of imbue in the workers this idea of working in a global space, and not just in Trinidad and Tobago, because it's part of our culture says that when we operate locally, we in a lot of cases over generations, we do find when we go abroad and work in an agency over abroad, when we come back home, somehow the culture gets the better of us. How does an employee in DHL sort of be ring-fenced from letting the culture seep too much into their attitudes, their approach to the job?
So it's a number of things, right? And I think Cobell spoke about taking that personal development aspect of it, and a lot of it comes back down to, taking a level of personal responsibility, right? And also understanding your purpose. It is something that we drive in terms of why you're here, why you're even doing what you're doing, what are your contributions to the business. And I think once an employee understands their value, their contribution, or why they're part of the business, you get a different level of engagement, and you get a different approach. So in terms of an employee going out there, and the culture is very different, and then coming back into our culture, because I've had an employee like that, coming back into our culture, they see it differently. And it has not been, I have not experienced a shift back into the culture here, because for them, it's like, you know what, I have now learned a new way of doing things, and it's a continuous progression. So that, Andy, is a lot of that depends on the person themselves, and it depends on their desire to continuously grow. Because while an organization have a culture, a home has a culture, a community has a culture. Yeah. So every individual bring their own individual culture to the organization. And so it really depends on that person and their desire to, continuously improve and grow, rather than falling back into some culture that probably wasn't ideal in driving their development.
Yeah, and so in some cases, you have people talk about that workers will decide, well, that will see about itself. I could deal with that tomorrow. How do you train against that?
That's where the robots come in. So again, so there's other aspects of it, right? So while one of the things we drive for is to have employees fully engaged and to support them, at the end of the day, we still have to look at whether it be consequence management or different ways to ensure that the employee is doing what they require.
Consequence management. Expand on that a little bit. That's a critical factor. You just put your finger on it.
Yes. So we know that every action has a, as I say, a equal opposite reaction, right? So there's always a consequence to every action. And if an employee is doing something that is not aligned to the goals of the business and is not aligned to driving the KPIs, and this is happening on an ongoing basis, there is a process. And part of that process, if things are not rectified, would be some level of consequence, whether it be, final warning letters, whether it be suspension, and, the end that we try very much not to reach, which is termination, because these things have implications for the business as well.
Yeah. All right, Kapil, we just have a couple of minutes more. I want you to come down on the issue of the importance of going global to survive locally.
Mm-hmm. So as I was saying earlier, Andy, a number of companies now more than ever recognize that we have to consider new markets for business survivability. Andrea shared a bit about technology and the role technology plays in business as well. What we've recognized during the pandemic especially is that a number of new businesses came out of the pandemic. We saw the rise of the gig economy, where a number of people lost jobs, but their side hustle become their main hustle, as we would say. And the gig economy is actually growing. It is expanding. Technology is allowing us to further expand our businesses while being right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Shipping, and DHL is in the business of shipping. It's easy now to get your goods and services across international territories and crossing the Atlantic Ocean and whatever ocean it may be, because at the end of the day, we have the technology to do so. Business travel and the need for business travel has been reduced. You can have meetings now via Zoom. The technology is allowing for that as well. So we recognize that with the growth of the knowledge base in our society, the pressures of opening up emerging markets and new businesses, the leading cutting edge global companies that now exist, now more than ever, it's important for businesses to recognize that we do not operate only in the domestic market, in the home territory, but we are on a global playing field. Right. And it's for that very reason we believe that HR, in addition to executives, need to come together to understand what it means for intellectual capital and intellectual property, what it means for financial assets, what it means for building sustainable competitive advantage going forward in light of all that is happening, what it means for the basic contract of employment, recognizing that even the world of work, where we consider work to be, has also shifted, right?
All right, so we got to go, but let me just ask, let's go back on the sessions, when they're going to be held, where they're going to be held, over what period?
So on October 12th, the next edition of C-Suite's Conversation will be held at the Hyatt. It's from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. The panel, we have a fantastic panel of 7 key business leaders: Lisa Marie Daniel, the general manager from Fashion TT, Franca Costello, the chairman of Invest TT, Mr. Elson James, JMMB Express Finance, Mr. Mark Luquan, the president of NGC, Mr. Karma Maraj, the founder of Sasha Cosmetics, right. Jerome Priscilla, the president of the Promoters Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, Andrea Davis, who is with us this morning, our country manager for DHL. We do have government represented as well. The Minister of Trade will be a featured speaker, along with the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
All right. And what is your specific topic, Ms. Davis?
My topic would be, as Cavell said, talking about the role of how, or reverse globalization, basically. Yeah. So, coming from a global company with I should say a market, or with a setup in Trinidad, I think we also have to look at what is required by the global company, right, that impacts us here. So I think there's a lot, and I would encourage, everyone to, come out and hear, because you never know. I mean, everybody wants to grow their business now, right, but you have to understand the impacts as well as the opportunities.
And the sort of imperatives for doing that. So thanks to both of you, Cavell, Joseph Centroma, and Andrea Davis. The C-Suite Conversations, October 12th, the Hyatt, right?
Yes, correct. Thank you, Andy, for having us this morning.
Thank you very much. Well, as we head up to the top of this hour, let's take a look at what's happening around the region. And this first installment is in Grenada, where the Prime Minister wants to transform the business sector, inclusive of education and agriculture. Let's take a look at that.
Grenada's Prime Minister, Honorable Deacon Mitchell, wants to transform the way we do business as a people, especially as it relates to the education and agricultural sectors. During a recent town hall meeting in New York, Prime Minister Mitchell spoke to the need to incorporate vocational education and skills training in the learning process. He says the current education system does not adequately prepare students for the reality of the world's economic state. pointing out that while Grenada is surrounded by water, there is still no formal training to prepare students for jobs in the aquamarine or boat building field. As such, the Grenadian leader says there must be a change to the modus operandi.
There is almost no reference in our education system to the ocean, to the sea, to our beaches, to our coral reef, to fishing, to preservation of our fish stock, to learning to fish, to the preservation of fish, to the processing of fish, or to the sale of fish. Our education system makes absolutely no reference to that issue. It makes no reference to boat building, to boat repairs, and the list goes on and on. That is the reality. You only learn to build a boat if you're from Piti Martinique and Carriacou. Or from Gov, or Marian, or Subies. That's the truth. But if you're not from these villages, the likelihood that you learn how to build a boat or repair a boat is slim. It's either because you have an uncle or father or brother or someone who will pass that knowledge on. But our formal education system does not address that alone. And I make this point to say, it is not that difficult to transform Grenada. It is not that difficult to match our education system to the actual realities of what we face. But it seems over the last 30 or 35 years not to have been any political or leadership will to do so. But that stopped on the 24th of June 2022.
Touching on the subject of agriculture, Prime Minister Mitchell said a strategic approach that focuses on local consumption and production must be adopted. He said there must be collective willpower if this is to be realized.
Minister of Education, I believe there's about 10 to 20,000 students in the education system in Grenada. If you had a market of 10 to 20,000 people, your business will be successful. A simple thing, and I've used this example over and over. Policy decision that says each child must eat a banana a day would mean you'd have to produce 20,000 bananas a day. By 5 days a week, that's 100,000. That's 100,000 bananas a month. So we didn't need to export the bananas to England. But when we were prevented from doing so, we never focused on ourselves, and the banana industry died. But it's a simple industry to revive by simply saying, we will feed our own children with our food, and we will give them natural starch that are healthier by simply doing so. But it is not just the growing of the bananas. Someone has to pick them, someone has to store them, someone has to ensure they ripened, and then we have to have the distribution system that allows it to be distributed consistently at the schools. And I'm saying right there is a business model.
Well, two things there. I like his declaration. It's not that difficult to transform Grenada. Take note of that. And then look at the size of the crowd of Grenadian nationals in New York. It says something as well. Well, we take a break now for the news at 7. When we come back, we're talking with Mr. Ravi Bhargavan Maharaj. The charge against MP David Lee, politically motivated or not? Stay with us. This is AM Prime on this Thursday morning.
Here's your WESN News on the Hour. I am Denise St. Clair. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. PDP chairman says focus remains on integrity of party. End of weekly health media briefings after 2 years. JTUM awaits Monday's budget announcements. And internationally, US dollar hits new 20-year high as Russia calls up reservists. Now for the details. PDP chairman Dr. Sean Ned says the focus right now to ensure the integrity of the party is maintained. Speaking on WESN's AM Prime, he says the process of healing must now begin.
We have to put a stop to that. That shouldn't occur with any party. You must respect the position of any the highest position in any group, because of course if you don't do that, you allow for confusion and in a way a direction that is not good for the group. Usually in the space of Tobago, that means the destruction of parties. And I am not going to be a party to that.
Health Minister Terence Dialsing has announced that the weekly press briefings since the start of the pandemic will end on Wednesday. Speaking at the Ministry of Health conference, the minister said there is not a need anymore to update the public on this level as the pandemic is slowly becoming endemic.
We have decided that today's press conference in this format will be the last of the series of press conferences we've been having over the past 2.5 years. Of course, if there are any developments that we need to come to you with or that is concerning the public, we will hold a press conference at the Ministry of Health as needed, when needed. So today marks the end of our regularly scheduled press conferences.
The minister also advised that the public health regulations have been extended until December 31st. The only regulation that still exists is the wearing of masks within public health institutions. JTIM's Assistant General Secretary Trevor Johnson has indicated that the unions would be closely monitoring the budget presentation on Monday, as it will hint the government's next move and the Chief Personnel Officer's instructions regarding ongoing wage and back pay negotiations.
We certainly would be taking in the budget to see if there are any signals that may vary from the present position of the government. But the trade union movement, we will respond accordingly to the budget presentation when it is made. We'll examine it. I don't want to preempt it at this stage, but we will certainly look at it to see what signals come that may provide some perhaps platform where we can have some meaningful further discussions on the individual negotiations within the public and state sector.
In international news now, the US dollar climbed to a new two-decade high on Wednesday after Russia said it was mobilizing 300,000 military reserves in an escalation of the war in Ukraine. In a televised national address Wednesday, President Vladimir Putin announced an immediate partial mobilization of Russian citizens and threatened to use all means at our disposal to defend Russia and our people. He also referenced the potential use of nuclear weapons. The speech pushed the greenback up 0.4% against a basket of major currencies to its strongest level since 2002. Well, that was News to the Hour on WESN. I am Denise St. Clair. Thanks for watching.
Chantwell Vibes, a musical tribute to Andre Tanker, Saturday, September 24th, 2022, Central Bank Auditorium. Showtime, 7:30 p.m. Featuring 3 Canal, Mavis John, Ataclan, Empress Ajay, Stacy Sobers, and panist Natasha Joseph. Tickets, $300. Available at Crosby's Music Center, St. James. Extra Foods, Arima, Grand Bazaar, and Endeavour. Online at Island E-Tickets. Committee members at 678-2843 or 482-3111. Central Bank box office on the day of the event. Mart's Liquor Palace, Digomarte Main Road, La Puerta. A musical tribute to Andre Tanker. Saturday, September 24th, 2022. Central Bank Auditorium. Showtime, 7:30 p.m.
welcome back to the program. Well, let me just say this. I don't know, certainly, of any private citizen who has gone to court on more occasions to challenge this or that assumption about the law and how it works and how sometimes it doesn't work in the favor of the common citizen, and has won handsomely as he has, Ravi Balgopan Maharaj. On that basis, we've asked him to help us understand, get behind the discussions about the charges laid against Mr. David Lee, the Member of Parliament, for point of pay in this business about the possession of a car, as to whether he is the rightful, well, he continues to be the owner. He says yes, and he says his case is unassailable in his favor. He's going to establish that in court. But on that basis, how then were these charges laid against him and against others in this matter about the purchase and the transfer, the alleged transfer of a vehicle to a second party, ultra-virus laws which make way for that? Mr. Lee is the MP for point of pay, and by that he has sort of allowances made available in the Parliament, as every member of Parliament, to get tax relief on vehicles they want to buy. The issue is that he flouted those arrangements and had the vehicle transferred to somebody else. He's saying that that is not the case. He's saying he still owns the vehicle. How then were these charges laid? We want to see if our friend here can help us get behind that to some extent. Ravi, good morning. Good to see you.
Hi, good morning, Andy. And thanks for having me again.
All right, let me start by putting the question. The opposition in the Parliament is saying that these charges are politically motivated. That means that whoever laid the investigators who spent months looking at the files on this, seeing names about who is associated with the vehicle along with Mr. Lee, is there, and that person is facing charges as well. The opposition's allegations are that the investigators were suborned in laying these charges. They are politically motivated. To what? Let's see if we could clear that up to start.
Well, absolutely. And when you look at the timing of it, you would remember that it was since 2020, issues were being raised with then Attorney General Mr. Faris Al-Rawi.
Yes.
And the sale of one of his Porsche SUVs that he had purchased under the same provisions that would have been afforded to Mr. Lee, where he got tax exemptions and customs exemptions and so forth. So after, I think it was 3 years, Mr. Arawi sold his Porsche to Mr. Roger Kewal Singh, who would then go on to be a member of the Police Service Commission. He wasn't a member at that time. But the transfer documents and transfer of the sale of that Porsche wasn't completed until 2021. And because of that, I raised the issue through my legal team, Mr. Anand Ramlogan, of whether or not the sale was legal, whether or not they had followed all the protocols. Because again, the car would have remained legally in the name of Mr. Faris Al-Rawi from 2016 to 2021, even though he stated that the purchase was completed in 2016. And he later showed a check with that date from Mr. Kewal Singh. So the issue then became a matter of the Integrity Commission and filing an integrity form on the vehicle, because if it remained legally in the name of Mr. Arawi for those 5 years, then when he claimed that he got rid of the vehicle in 2016, he would have been filing an incorrect integrity and public life form and declaration. So all of these issues were brought up. The leader of the opposition...
The record established that Mr. Al-Rawi had filed something in 2016, which is 1 year or so after he bought the car, which is against the rules. But that he held on...
No. He purchased a car, I think it was either in 2012 or 2013. Right. So the time had gone. But what he disposed of it, like I said, because it wasn't transferred in the licensing office, legally the car still remained in his name. And that is where questions came about, because Mr. Kewal Singh was seen driving the vehicle and keeping it in his ownership. So issues arose because of that. He said it was sold since 2016, but again, there was no legal paperwork to verify it
that.
until 2021. Mrs. Kamala Pasabi-Sensor sent a file to the police service to investigate the matter, and then got back a response that I think it was only a couple of days ago that they had completed their investigation and found no wrongdoing, which is extremely strange given the circumstances and the evidence which was provided. Fast forward now to 2022. Earlier this year, we find out that Mr. David Lee is being investigated for a matter that's not dissimilar to what was going on with Mr. Arawi, except in the case of Mr. Lee, it is for a vehicle that is in his name, is in his possession, and that really and truly, as far as the law goes and what the law stipulates, he hasn't transferred the vehicle within the time frame that has been established with regards to the provisions and to the exemptions that are afforded to him. So really and truly, I don't understand where the government is finding a case for this legal challenge and are taking him to court. I know there's an issue, they say, arising regarding corruption or something, but in looking at the response Mr. Lee gave, apparently the vehicle, the financing for the vehicle came from a financial institution and it's under his name. So really and truly, the only conclusion you can come to is that the government is only doing this as a response to the challenge and the claims made against Mr. Arawi, and trying to just deflect from that.
Yeah, but I wanted to see how we can sort of exorcise the government from it, because the government doesn't take people to court on this. It is the authorities, right? We're talking about here the police and the courts. Not so. You're saying that how is the government involved?
Well, the matter was first raised by the Minister of Finance, I believe it was last year or 2020, during one of his budget presentations.
Yeah.
And since then, the government has been looking very closely at all of these vehicles, at the exemptions and so forth. And they're the ones that are constantly going back to it and bringing it up in the public domain. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the government that forwarded the documents to the police for the investigation.
All right. You say if you're not mistaken, so you're not sure about that, but you're just going on.
Well, no. It is the government. I can't say exactly who from the government did it, but it is the government, either the Minister of Finance or someone from the Ministry of Finance, who would have forwarded those documents to the police service for investigation. The thing about it,
and is anything wrong with that, or is something wrong with that?
Well, no, but what I was getting back to, in the case of Mr. Faris Al-Rawi, when the leader of the opposition wrote to the police service and asked for an investigation to be launched, it was 3 months later that the police service wrote back to her. And in their response, they asked that she be the one to provide information regarding individuals who were involved with the matter and who Mr. Arawi publicly said was handling the matter on his behalf. And they were asking for any other further evidence that she could provide in investigating the matter. And what it shows is that really and truly the police isn't equipped to really carry out these types of investigation without assistance from a third-party source. And so if that is the case, then the third party in this matter involving Mr. Lee has to come from the government itself. And I know that one of the agencies that were also involved in this matter is the FIU, Financial
Intelligence Unit.
Right. And they fall within the remit of the Ministry of Finance as well. So all of this links back to the Ministry of Finance. I know the government is claiming, they don't have a hand in it because it's the police service and it's the director of public prosecution, and they're saying these are independent bodies.
Right.
But
and what is there to challenge that? What is there to repudiate that position that these are independent operators not taking sort of bait
Well, they are supposed to be an independent body, but again, it is the government that is furnishing them with the information and the evidence that they are using to make their findings and to carry on this case. But the question is, where is the government getting this information from, and what is the veracity of it, and how are they using this information to target their political opponents? And that is, when you look at it, that is what they are doing.
That is what it looks like to you. Absolutely,
because when you look at the law again, unless the law has changed and no one was informed of it, the car remains in the possession and in the legal ambit of Mr. David Lee.
We know that for a fact.
We know this for an absolute fact.
He says so, and he's pleading his innocence. So where does this Mr. Leong Poi enter the picture? Where does his name end up on any piece of paper, you think, to say that that he has access to the car, if not owns it? And how could he be the second person charged in the matter?
Absolutely, and this is what I'm saying, that as far as the law states that once as you are given the exemptions from taxes, you are not allowed to transfer the vehicle to any person within 2 years.
Right.
The vehicle has not legally been transferred to anyone, even if it is the case that someone else had been driving the vehicle. Even if that was the case, that doesn't interfere with the way that the law is stated and what the law entails. So therefore, there really shouldn't be a legal challenge to this matter in any way.
But then what is the basis on which the DPP says to the police, go ahead and charge? What do you think he saw that convinced him that something went wrong there then?
I don't know, and the thing about it, in the way that the information was provided to the press and to the public, they were very light on details as to what the charges really entailed. They simply stated very briefly that the matter had to do with the ownership of the vehicle and the financing of the vehicle. And in both of these matters, Mr. David Lee has come out publicly and stated that the car remains legally in his name, registered in his name. And in terms of the financing, he said that he had taken out a loan with one of a trusted financial institution, and so therefore, really and truly, I don't understand. And again, it all falls to the DPP to probably release more information regarding the charges, or we'll find out in due course when the matter finally appears in court.
Right. So the issue is that Mr. Lee is accused of having broken the rules under which he would have been allowed this $1.4 million tax break on this car because he's a member of Parliament, and that should not, the vehicle should not have changed hands under a certain amount of time. Is that 2 years? And one would assume then that is what happened. The car changed ownership, and there's documentation to establish that it changed ownership under that 2 years, right? That is a layman's understanding of how, in fact, he broke the law, right? You were saying that
you keep referring to documentation. Yeah. I don't know that the government, even the government or the DPP, has stated that there's any documentation. What they're basing this entire case on is that someone else was seen driving the vehicle at some point in time. Whether or not that's true, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that can be an offense.
But as the law is written and is stated, there can be no transfer of the vehicle from the party that received the exemption to a third party. And as far as I'm aware, and the government has given no information to the contrary, Mr. David Lee hasn't transferred the vehicle to anyone. It hasn't been sold, it hasn't been transferred legally in terms of the registration. So really and truly, there should be no case. And this shouldn't be something that is being taken to court at this point in time. And that's why I think Mr. David Lee feels as confident as he does.
Yeah, I mean, he says that. He continues to plead his innocence. He's somebody, like I said yesterday, I would say again, I like and I admire, but when one gets to trying to get behind it to understand, well, the basis on which the DPP, in all his independence and the independence of his office, would see information in front of him on the basis of which he would say to the investigators, go ahead and charge. That is the worrying part to me, and how then this becomes a feature in the narrative from the UNC that this thing is politically stained, and therefore it is a put-up job to go against Mr. Lee for whatever reason. Somebody seeing Mr. Leopold driving the vehicle and assuming that he owns it, is that established? Somebody is saying that Mr. Lee is saying that he remains the owner of the vehicle, but that people are saying they don't see him driving it. He's not saying that he drives it and he uses it.
No, but I'll tell you something else, and it gets into very murky territory as well. Saying that someone else who drives a vehicle owns a vehicle by proxy, because a lot of these vehicles, and you would have seen a lot of government ministers in particular, like Mr. Arawi, Mr. Dialsing, Mr. Imbert, they would have purchased not one but a number of vehicles throughout the years in Parliament.
Yeah.
And then it gets to a point where, like, after 2 or 3 years, they would purchase a vehicle and then purchase another one. And then the question is, who are using these vehicles in the interim? Are they using one vehicle and then purchasing? And it might be a family member, it may be someone else.
Yeah.
But then where do you draw the line at ownership, at who should be driving it and who shouldn't be driving it? Again, all we can do is look at the law as stated. And as stated, an exemption is valid once the car registration isn't transferred to another individual within 2 years of being purchased.
Right.
And as far as I'm aware, Mr. Lee has not done that. So therefore, there should be no contravention of the law, and I don't understand what the charges are.
Because that will have to be established. Now that the matter is going to go to court, it has to be established that a transfer took place inside of the 2-year period in which it should not have happened, and that transfer was to this person who has been named and who has been charged as well for having participated in this aspect of what is called corruption. Not so?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, from first-hand experience, and you would be aware of this, the government has a history, and especially this PNM government, of contesting and challenging matters in court where they really have no right to be doing so. And I don't know you would have seen even more recently where I filed an FYE, and there was over $1 billion listed by the government from different ministries and agencies, paid only to lawyers and attorneys for these legal challenges that they are making. And the thing about it didn't include, the figures at that time didn't include the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Energy, and other agencies as well. So that number could quite easily double at the point of getting those numbers. The government is determined to just create an industry for attorneys in Trinidad and Tobago, and specific attorneys in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is a pattern that we've been noticing. And I think this is just another example of that.
And so that investigators get used in that for what? I mean, because their record and their career is going to be stained by this if it turns out that these charges were baseless.
No, but they aren't. You look at certain attorneys that have challenged me on a number of matters. Most notably is a former Attorney General, Russell Martino. And case after case, he's lost in the courts, challenging FYAs and so forth. But he continues to get work and is continuing to be employed by the government. Yeah. So I don't know that any of them records would be tarnished because of a loss once as they are complying with any instructions that the government is giving them.
Is there any scope for filing a request under the FOIA provisions to find out, to get behind this matter, you think? Or since it's going to court now, that is not possible?
No, it's not. And because it involves a police investigation as well, you wouldn't be able to file an FOI for any of these details. But like I said, when the court documents are finally revealed, we'll be able to get a clearer picture of what exactly the government saw that made them think about filing this charge. The thing about it that you have to consider as well is that we're going into a budget, and the economic outlook for the country isn't good. So the government is looking for a smoke screen to cover up that. And then we're going into
you think so? You think so? And
absolutely.
And all these other people get incorporated into this political plot?
Absolutely. And as I said before, the first time that this matter reared its head, it was during a debate for the national budget. And we're going into a local government election at the end of the year, and you would have recalled that in the last election, the PNM lost a number of districts within the San Fernando City Corporation. And some of those districts fall within the constituency of Pointe-a-Pierre and Mr. David Lee. So all of these factors may point to the real reason that these charges are being brought before the court now as a way to kind of discredit him and as a way to try to get back those lost territories as well.
All right. There's one that I certainly have an interest, a deep, abiding interest in, and we want to thank you now for your attempt at assisting us here. And we will continue to follow it because I think this is troubling, whichever way you look at it. But thank you very much, Ravi Bhargavan Maharaj, on this.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's our broadcast for this morning. Before we go, let me just tell you what is on the front page of the Newsday Trinidad and Tobago today. A big story. You should get to it. Parents of this gentleman you're seeing there saying they had no idea about what he was involved in, how he was able to become so accomplished in using the kinds of firearms that were involved in this attempted robbery at Pennywise in Laramie, and he was shot to death. They're saying, we are not monsters. We do not know where he got the guns. I don't know where he learned to use the guns. We do not know how he got the courage to do what he did. That's one of them. And in the case of another of the bandits who was shot dead, residents around where he lives in, they are glad that he's dead. So those things and more in today's edition of the Newsday Trinidad and Tobago. This is just a look at the front page of the Newsday Tobago. That's our program for this morning. We want to thank you for watching. We want to thank all our guests. I'm Andy Johnson telling you that in half an hour from now, we have news at the top of the hour again, followed by today's edition of Talking Point with Shah and Small and Company. Thanks for watching. We see you tomorrow.